Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Riverdale, Season 7, Episode 7. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. Well, first and foremost, it kind of ties into each other, so let's start off with, picking up with the Betty and Archie thing. Obviously, word has gotten around, obviously, with something going on like this. It passes on from one person to another, and it becomes a game of telephone where the truth got so lost along the way that, yes, there's bits of truth there, but the rest of it's kind of spiraled out into so much more. Because of the time frame, Betty is being demonized the most, and like Archie is just like, woo, and it's obviously he's not like ecstatic about it. It's very embarrassing, but you know, he had a very different conversation with his Uncle Frank than he did than Betty. Because obviously it's like, that's a conversation that's not only then, obviously it's even more prevalent then, but I think it's still an important conversation even now of like, yeah, a woman's desires and her sexuality is kind of something that, you know, can be like, oh, look at her, she's promiscuous or something like that. Like, obviously it's going to be even worse then, but that doesn't mean that doesn't still exist today. I think those are the parallels that are being drawn here in so many different regards. But yeah, like Betty's is definitely getting the rougher end of the stick because she's the one getting punished for it. Archie isn't, because his Uncle Frank is like, you're a hot-blooded American male, like, it's okay. But, you know, from Hal and especially Alice's point of view, it's like they're treating her like, oh, you're acting like a quote unquote floozy or hussy. Like that's what they're treating Betty as. Like this is just stacked on. It's just like her recent developments, growing into who she's being and having her own wants and desires in a time where a woman's supposed to kind of know her place and she's supposed to fit a certain mold of what a woman is, and especially in a time, and this is prevalent to the episode too, of what a man's supposed to be. So all of that. So Betty's definitely getting like the rougher end of the deal. That's why I also think it's so interesting Cheryl was kind of like chastising in the way she did, because it's like, it is, do you not recognize the hypocrisy behind all that, considering yours and Tony's situation? Because I think Tony would probably be like, yo, Cheryl, pump the brakes, like, aren't you being a little like, it's hypocritical, but also it's because I think it's also Cheryl, like, because her desires and her wants and her sexuality doesn't fall into the norms of what a woman's supposed to be in this time frame. So that's where it's like, it's supposed to be a solidarity of like, you know, but I think it's also maybe Cheryl overcompensating because she's trying to like, hey, you're let everyone pay attention to your circumstances. I'm me, but maybe it's also like you're doing what you're doing, and it's just like, wow, you're a mess, Betty. At least me, I'm being very prim and proper about my circumstances, even though being gay wouldn't be prim and proper in this time frame. So that's why I'm like, it should be a solidarity thing, but eventually I think it will get to that. I think they will find some solidarity. I think especially if Betty finds out about Cheryl's circumstances, because other people will find out. It's only a matter of time before it might be whether it's an Evelyn or whether it's her own parents, like putting her business on blast. And it's just like, right, all of this, like getting on Betty's case this episode is probably going to come back full circle with Betty being there to support you, even though you weren't there to support her, type of thing. So we'll have to wait and see. But yeah, like I said, it's kind of like connects over into the whole thing with Kevin, that his dad sees the magazines that he's got, and he knows like, okay, something's up. And to prevent that, it's like, right, I'm gonna straighten you out. And even Uncle Frank uses those words, like, oh, we'll straighten him out. You know, because Frank's just worried that, you know, Kevin's not a guy like you and me. And I think this is actually beautiful in some regards of like, because it brought Archie and Kevin closer. Because like, yeah, Kevin and Archie are friends in the original timeline, but I feel like we never got to see a lot of that friendship develop. Like we saw moments here and there because it's just like, we're a group of friends, so we're tight with each other in that regard, but we never got a lot of like Kevin and Archie, at least not to my recollection, because obviously amongst the group, Betty and Kevin were best friends. So, but I think this presents an opportunity for both of them to get closer, especially because he's forced to join the basketball team, because it's like, hey, want him to join something manly, show him what real men are like. It's that type of situation. And Archie was trying to figure out, like, why did your dad, like, force you to be on the team? And he's like, yeah, because I'm still a virgin, and the fact is that I like poetry, and I want to talk about movie stars and stuff. But Archie's like, yo, that's me too. Like, you know, being really into the artsy side of things isn't kind of a bad thing. Because, I mean, Archie's supposed to be the all-American kid, but he also has always been that character that's like, yeah, I float in different realms. I'm not just, like, a jockey dude. I'm also the artistic dude. I'm also kind of like a bit of a nerdy dude as well. I'm just an all-around good guy. You know, like he roams around every realm. I mean, that's also reflected by the fact of who his friends are. Like, there are different circumstances, different social statuses, different positions and stuff like that. And, you know, Archie's kind of at the centerfold of that. And I think that's always been represented in the show. And so in this case of him trying to help out Kevin, especially when Julian's boasting about, like, oh yeah, he lost his virginity at 16 to Twyla, which I'm like, obviously you're like, oh, cool. That wouldn't float today, but maybe then that was, but it's like, no, that's statutory. Also, we've covered that in this storyline because of the whole student-teacher affair Archie had in season 1. But it's like, oh yeah, like Julian's like, yeah, I lost my virginity at 16, and it's like, because that's a full-grown woman, Twyla. So I'm like, wow. So I guess, like, one day, wasn't she the leader of the Goonies? Wasn't she with the Goonies, or was she with someone else? Or was she just doing her own thing? I don't remember Twyla's circumstances. Either way, when it's all said and done, like, Kevin's trying to boast, like, oh no, I'll go ahead, I'll hook up with, like, Twyla to lose my virginity, but he doesn't know what to do about it. He's kind of nervous, and, you know, for Archie is like, it's okay, I'm a virgin too, but for Kevin it's like, yeah, but why is that? It's no issue for you to be a virgin, but for me it's an issue. And then once again, the double standards of this time of, like, if Betty wasn't a virgin, that'd be an issue. Archie, it's like, oh, good on you. Like, everyone would clap and congratulate him. I mean, they literally did it in the locker room with one of the other people. I love that Julian tried to throw Fangs in under the bus with that about Midge, but it's also like, yeah, that's none of your business. Because also, we haven't circled back to that, but let's not forget Midge is pregnant and they're keeping that super hush-hush. So, and also, like, me being in love with the woman I love, and we're potentially having a kid together, that's my business. And obviously that didn't come up, but it's like, it's not just like some, like, because also the sex conversation could lead to reveals about her being pregnant. So it's also like, yeah, like, Fangs is like, yo, my business is my business. But it's also, like I said, and now Kevin, he needs to not be a virgin because he needs to prove himself that he's straight. You know, and that's why Kevin has such issues with it. It's like, why is it so much pressure on me? And ultimately, Archie ended up talking to Betty about it, and Betty was apparently upset, and obviously understandable. And so luckily, Archie got there in time to stop Twyla and Kevin, but nothing happened because Kevin broke down. But I guess it's like, once again, it's a value, it's a effed up value that a lot of people in this time frame share. So I was almost hoping Twyla would be super understanding, which she kind of is, because she's like, yeah, I've been around the block, you know, I met all kinds, so I know that. Oh, the moment she's like, Archie said, like, oh, I'm here to get my friend, she's like, oh, your friend, okay. She's like, I've seen it all the time, so I know, go ahead, get him out of here, because it's like, okay, it kind of figures as much. That's his circumstances. And so Archie's like, yeah, I'll help you out, Kevin. We'll say you hooked up with Twyla, like, that way everyone will be off your back. I'll help you sell this lie. But sadly, his dad knows, because it wasn't Julian's idea to send him to Twyla. It was actually Sheriff Kellick. I was about to say, is he Sheriff in this town? He's like, yes. So he's like, I heard from Twyla, because he's like, I thought it'd mean a lot more coming from one of your classmates than me. And he's like, I heard about you crying, and now I don't know how to interpret that as, I don't know whether that should be interpreted as, hey, Initially, I didn't know, because I was almost hopeful that he was feeling bad, because he's like, you were crying, and like, I didn't know I was putting that much pressure on you, because his father, obviously in the original timeline, was a lot more accepting of his son, because Kevin was already out by the time the series had started. I don't think. Well, was he not? I actually don't remember. Did his dad just not know? I don't remember now. But I remember them having like some heart-to-hearts. I know there was stuff about his mom that led to them having some heart-to-hearts and stuff like that. But I don't remember entirely. Because his mom is not dead. She's in the military, if I remember correctly. I don't know if she eventually passed away or not, but I don't think so. I think she was in the military, if I'm not mistaken, but I don't remember. But now I'm looking at it with the context of everything. I'm like, no, Sheriff Keller was disappointed because he's like, not only did you not do it, it confirms what I thought about you. The fact is you cried. You couldn't even, in his mind, man up. And it's like, that's heartbreaking that Kevin's got to deal with that. I don't know. Maybe his dad will come around and be very progressive for the time, but it's hard to say. I mean, once again, in a time that's on its taking steps towards progression, but even then, it's like at the time frame, you know, it's going to be a very, very long road ahead. Obviously, considering a lot of that is still issues that we're dealing with even now in 2023. Because that's the thing, things are better in some regards and they're worse in other regards when it comes to a lot of that progression, you know. And Archie just felt bad because he's like, I feel like I wanted to help Kevin, but I feel like I made things worse. And so for him, it's like, no, I'm not going to let Kevin like feel like alone in all of this. So it's like, hey, you, Clay, you guys want to like hang out and want to talk about like, you know, poetry and music and like movie stars and stuff. And I think it's what Kevin needed because it was such an isolating experience. Because he's no longer on the basketball team just because it's like, well, there's no point because he's like, it was meant to man up my son, but I see my son as like, for him, it's like Sheriff Keller. Like I said, maybe it's a combination of my son's lost cause, or maybe he is feeling guilty of like, I put my son in a position where he's uncomfortable. And it's also a time where it's like, men aren't supposed to cry. So for him, it's like, that probably adds more to him being quote unquote girly in Sheriff Keller's mind. But it's like, yeah, like it's a time where men are supposed to swallow their feelings. You know, that's a stereotype of like men in society and stuff like that. So then we also had this situation with picking up with the Betty thing. Her mom has her going like to their show. It's like, hey, this is a show where we kind of dance and stuff. And it's like, I don't want to do that, Mom. Only nerds and dorks do that. Like losers kind of do that. But it's like, yeah, you're going to be out there. And once again, Cheryl's kind of the head of that because it's like Cheryl's got to be the head of everything. But it also makes sense. The Blossoms are a major contributor to that news station and to that channel and that station. So it makes sense. So, but Betty's not all about it. I felt so bad for Doily because Betty and him had to dance. And then later on, she dances with that guy. And you see that look on Doily's face, almost like, oh, because he kind of didn't have it. No one wants to dance with him because the person that had previously danced with him was, I believe it was Ethel was his previous dance partner, but obviously we know how that played out for Ethel. She's at the Sisters of Quiet Mercy right now. Either way, that guy made a pass on Betty because he heard about all that stuff of like, oh, yeah, like, oh, you like being watched. And he saw that and an opportunity to grab her butt, which she pushed him away and slapped him on television, which her mom chastised her for because it's like, if that's the case, but you don't hit him on television stuff, it's like, Mom, we're completely ignoring the fact is the guy like grabbed me without my permission, but it's also because she's saying like, no, that's your fault because you had to blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, you're the one that put your daughter on blast, making her a pariah in town. You're the one that, you know, you would think you want to protect your reputation and everything, that you would want to keep that quiet. But it's like, no, you had to run your mouth off to other people, in particular Penelope, who ran off and ran her mouth off because she's the gossipy person. She has also like, she likes to feel better than everyone else, so being able to kind of tear people down. And Penelope's got that nasty side of herself. But when it's all said and done, Betty wanted to get back at her parents because it is that thing of no matter what, like the parents have kind of told them all the kids are entering their rebellious stage. I mean, that's any teenage, you know, it's teenage angst, but also I think even more so in this time, it's a time of rebels. I think, you know, especially with like Jane's Dean's death and everything. So it kind of, you know, it's like, you know, rebel without a cause and everything. So I think a lot of that influence is kind of playing, which is interesting to use the terminology influence, but getting into it, Betty ended up kind of doing the twirl on television, and she showed her underwear, and that was kind of like, no, cut the cameras, go to commercial, whatever. And it's like, yeah, she made a point. That's like, cool, now that I've done this, Mom, I knew exactly what I'm doing, I need you to get off my case. And it's like, fine, you don't have to show up here anymore, Betty, but you broke my heart. And it's that complicated thing of she got what she wanted, but it's only going to strain her relationship with her mom that much more. I mean, they've always had this complicated, strenuous relationship, but they've always kind of found their middle ground. They've always met in the middle at some points in times, despite the circumstances that kind of pull them apart. They do find their way back to each other. But like, once again, it's like Alice is in her like super like, I'm right, I get to dictate so much. I think it's because of maybe stuff in her own life. It's why, once again, why she's with Hal, why she's putting a lot of that on Betty, even though Betty's a high schooler. Once again, I'm also basing this on modern day principles. I'm not in the mindset of someone who lived in the 50s or 60s. I mean, I'm, being black at a different perspective anyway, but you get the point I'm making. That also blew up in Betty's face because now Werther's has his attention towards her. That seems like ooh, you are going to get sent off to the Sisters of Quiet Mercy along with Ethel. It feels like that. Like it might be the only I mean, it shouldn't be too surprising because literally Polly got sent there at the beginning of the series, so it's not that much of a stretch. And I'm sure that's also because doesn't Alice have her own connection to the Sisters of Quiet Mercy? Isn't that why she recommended it anyway for Polly? Because she has her own connection? I don't remember. We'll see, but it definitely has that feel like that's going to end up happening. Other than that, in this episode, we also had Veronica's circumstances. She got in trouble for giving Betty all that lingerie and stuff because it kind of falls back on her. So her parents are cutting her allowance and forcing her to get a job at the Babylonian, which I'm like, of course, how serendipitous. I almost was like, is she going to meet Reggie there or something? I was like, no, she actually ran into Clay, who's working there. It's a movie theater, which obviously she's always been a fan of movies and stuff like that. It'd also probably be a dream come true for Jughead too, but obviously they're not where they were before. But honestly, Veronica loves the place and she's enjoying it. She's kind of having to cover a lot, being a ticket person and a popcorn person and a cleanup person because Clay's the only person on staff, at least that we're aware of, that we saw in this episode. But sadly, it turns out the Babylonium isn't doing well, so Veronica wants to shoot a commercial, which obviously she wants to be more so behind the camera type of person, and so does Clay. He wants to do some directing of his own, and so, but, Veronica had to be the face of the video, which is so neat parallel, because it's like, oh, people would rather kind of go to a drive-in movie theater or stay at home and watch TV, which it's like, no, going to the movies is an experience. So once again, it's like, so I wonder, is that supposed to just be like, the writers pushing, because like obviously we had that, a pandemic and everything where like movie theaters aren't what people like really go that often. I'm sure it's still not where it used to be even now, but it is the thing of trying to convince people to go back to movie theater. There are literal ads and stuff like that that play in theaters. Kind of obviously like the one that gets memed the most is the Nicole Kidman one. So it's like, it's just an interesting direct parallel I thought was kind of neat in that regard. But it also seems like the Babylonium is being bought by Veronica's parents, which is so interesting. They're buying the place they forced you to get a job at because they're planning on, but they're going to take this place and turn it into a parking lot. So I was like, what was the point? And I guess it was like, oh, we'll teach her a lesson for a little bit. She'll work at the place until we want to demolish it, and then then she'll learn her lesson. Then we'll resume her allowance and stuff. Like, it's just meant to be a temporary thing, I guess. But Veronica's not going to take that lying down because the Babylonian means too much to her. The movies can be so much. That experience is so special that they get swept up in the feeling of going to the movies, and the movies you get to see, that she ended up selling some artwork from her home and ended up offering it to the guy who runs the theater because it's like, hey, this is actually going to be worth more than what my parents are willing to pay you for this place. And she sends a letter to her parents, telling a telegram specifically to her parents saying like, hey, I bought this place and it's mine, so it's not yours to turn into a parking lot. So that's kind of neat. And also playing into the entrepreneurship that Veronica had already long since established in the show, so we're seeing her kind of get, kind of start stepping into the deep end in that regard when it comes to this time frame and everything. So that's interesting. And then finally, we also had the storyline with Jughead. Him and Radberry are in a much better place, which is pretty neat. Because, Jughead's in trouble because of his comic books. And now, Featherby and Werther's are forcing his hand. Either stop writing these type of comics or you can leave Riverdale High. And he was willing to do it because he wasn't about to give up comic book writing, but Radberry's like, you need a high school education. You need your education. So do both. Make a pseudonym so you can keep writing like the horror comics you want to. Kind of write what you want to without having to stifle yourself, but also make everyone believe you're not fully giving up comic books by writing something like Super Duck. So it's like, oh, you're writing something wholesome. And I love that Radberry was there to be like, now if you want some beef, I can bring on the smoke, because like all this malarkey about what this is about, treating pornography and horror comics like the same thing. It's like, if you want to, we can take this to the Supreme Court. How does Jones versus Board of Education sound? You're like, whoa. Because he talked about taking like Jughead under his wing, which Jughead appreciated. He was like, yo, like I'm really happy to kind of help out. He's like, whoa, before we like go off signing the adoption papers, because Jughead doesn't have a dad around, and I think having a older male figure in his life like that, kind of filling that void a little bit, was kind of nice, especially someone who really engages in what he does and is all about it. Especially for him, it's like, you're someone I look up to, I respect your work, I know you're a fantastic writer, and you can help me expand and get better. And because of Betty's circumstances, like Weathers and Featherby aren't on his back anymore, but sadly they've turned all their attention towards her. But once again, I was worried, like, we're gonna find out Radberry's like stolen people's stories. Like, once again, I thought that was a parallel they were gonna make with Jughead, especially with the whole prep, the Stonewall prep storyline. But then all of a sudden there was a knock at the door. I was like, wait, is he about to get killed by someone? I was like, there's no like Werther's and them wouldn't do something like that. And then all of a sudden he's in front of the milkman. I was like, the same one Ethel saw, the one that's going around killing people. So that's definitely going to be interesting if the murder ends up being the same, but then they might still try and draw a parallel to Jughead. We'll see, because the murder might not be exactly the same. It might not have the brutality that Ethel was there. Like, I wonder, is this just a straight up like, nah, this is like the evil of Riverdale manifesting itself as this guy? Is this still kind of tying back into the Tabitha of it all? Because we're having like everyday normal stuff in Riverdale, but eventually it probably won't be till like the later parts of the season that it really culminates as like, no, like this is the evil curse that is in Riverdale that's been ingrained in Riverdale for so long while I'm trying to untangle everything. It's manifesting itself like this, probably trying to kill everyone before Tabitha's able to do what she needs to do. Probably like destroy the people in Riverdale, kind of destroy that light and smother it out so that Riverdale's consumed in darkness and undo all that Tabitha's trying to undo on her part. I kept wondering, I was like, why does that actor seem so familiar? I've probably seen him in stuff before, but what clicked in my head when I was sitting here thinking about it, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. He was in, what was that? I can't remember. Is it part 1 or part 2? Part 2, maybe? There was an ice cream man, because Sabrina was supposed to reap people. She was basically supposed to like collect people's souls because they hadn't paid their debts or whatever, and their price to pay was like their souls or whatever. One of the people was like an evil ice cream man that like kidnapped a little girl, and I think he had kidnapped and killed kids before. He ultimately ended up going to hell. So, obviously, there's been overlap between Chilling Adventures of Sabrina and this. Once again, he was an ice cream person here. Now he's a milkman. And it's like, they specifically cast that for that particular reason. I think they 100% did that on purpose. So, it's been a while since I saw that season of Chilling. Like I said, I want to say it was part 2. Like I said, because that was when she was... I think that was already after she put her name in the book and everything. I know she was doing that because she was kind of... Or was that a part 3 storyline? Because wasn't she doing her thing in hell at that time? Maybe? Once again, I'm not remembering off the top of my head. Either way, so it's been a hot minute since I've seen any Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, so... But I think that's what they're... I think that's the same actor, if I'm not mistaken. I could be completely wrong, though. So, I'm curious to see how that all plays out, how that all develops. We'll ultimately have to wait to see where the next episode takes us with all of this. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, love life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day, and goodbye.